Ba-boom! Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Vagabond Dog Industry Chats. This week, we have storied game composer Chel Wong joining us today to talk about audios and musics and things I don't know a whole lot about. But hopefully we're going to learn more about being a game composer, making music for games, and hopefully, actually, the thing I need to learn about is how to work well with a game composer. As somebody making a game who cannot do music, how do I work well with somebody? But anyway, your work has been seen in games like Kine and Only Cans. You recently joined the She Dreams Elsewhere project, and Whisker Squadron, which I don't know a lot about yet, but hopefully you can tell us something about. Jan says he just finished getting S rank on all cans in Only Cans. Worth it 10 out of 10.
Oh my god. I would like to make it very clear right now. I did not voice any of the cans. I sang the jingle. I did background vocals to the DLC's credit song, but I did not voice any of the cans.
The DLC's credit song is amazing, by the way.
It's so good!
It is so well done.
Oh, it's so good. I listen to it all the time. I sing that at karaoke. I'm a big nerd.
We can jump in there then. So, how did you come to get involved with that project? What was that experience like? And like what exactly were your contributions for the project?
So, to be perfectly honest, Only Cans, the amount of contribution I've done to that is like relatively low. I knew a lot of the people working on that game. And there's a few people that I met like through working on that, and they were friends with the kind of, I think it was essentially, it was just like a shit post of what if OnlyFans but cans, and then I think like during the holiday break in December, they're like, let's make a fucking video game in like 10 days.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm like, hey, if you need anything, like I can spare some time. And they're like, we need a jingle. I'm like, gotcha. So I took a little bit of time to make a jingle, and then they decided to launch it onto Steam, and they needed content, so I wrote a few tracks. I think I wrote about 5 total tracks for the game, so like not a ton, but it was just a matter of like, I'm friends with a lot of the people that made the game beforehand.
Very often we talk about this quite often on the show, but like very often we find that is the path to like getting work on projects and getting involved in things is just knowing people and having friends. It's a valuable resource. But if for those curious, how did you know the Only Cans crew?
So if there's anything that I'm known for besides game audio, it's networking. And before the pandemic, I would go to like 5 to 6 meetups every month in the Boston area.
Okay.
And then at some point, people were like, "Wow, you know everyone." I'm like, "I do." And it's just over time, like going to all these meetups and trying to hustle and find work and blah 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 blah. And you make friends, and you just get to know the people in your community. And every time you go to a meetup, you'd see people that you met before. That just happened over time. And then the pandemic happened, and I ended up joining something called the Game Industry Gathering, which is like this big ass Zoom call. And it's international, so I've literally met people from all over the world doing this networking on Zoom. And like the ridiculous person I am, I do it 12 hours every week. It's 12 hours long on Friday, and I do it all 12 hours. I think only a couple other people really do that. And some people are like, I've been incredibly consistent with networking.
Right.
So that's just how I do things.
So I mean, is this a trait that you've always, like a habit that you've always sort of developed? I guess being sort of a hired gun, it is probably one of the most valuable skill sets you can have, properly networking yourself. Is it something that you've found you've had to cultivate your capacity for, or does it just come naturally to you to network properly? Because I know for a lot of people it's like I know for me, I cannot stay in a in a group for
Oh
12
God,
hours. Like
no!
it's
No one should. All right. So like, I do it for a couple. Like one, I love it. I legitimately love it,
Mhm.
and I do it because I want to. But two, I have the worst FOMO ever. Like, it is, it is terrible, and I'm always like, oh, but if I don't go to the thing, what if like, and then I go because I'm like, I'm just so afraid of like missing out, or of like, what if that one time I meet the one person I need to meet in order to do the blah 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 blah.
Right.
And so you can't miss out if you don't miss anything. And it's starting to catch up to me now in terms of just being able to do everything is it's literally impossible. But um, I I gotta say it's kind of made us sort of good. I think reputation in terms of like just being able to stick to people's minds and being known in your community.
Right. Right. Right.
It's scary at first though.
So, but
I will say that.
are you saying that you're finding that like you're now having you're overextended in terms of workload from being such a heavy networker, or are you have the capacity to take on additional projects anymore?
So I think it's just that I was talking to a friend about this earlier on Twitter, and when we first started in this career, it is really, really, really easy to overexert yourself to get the ball rolling. When you have nothing to show for, you do everything you can to just get your foot in the door.
Right.
And now that a lot of us are here and we're in the room and people know us, um, it's really hard to pare back to cut away at the things that we did. Um, so in a sense, one might say that to to all that networking that I did, I think has paid off. I
Mm-hmm.
think it is, and I don't regret it. I don't regret any of it. Uh, but it's definitely a lot of time and it's a lot of energy. And there's just so many things in this world. And there's so much media that I wish to consume, and there's just so all these people that I want to spend my time with. And I literally cannot do it all. There's just
Mm-hmm.
not enough time in one day, in one week, in a year, in a lifetime. And I'm like, and I'm now at this point where I'm starting to be like, okay, what do I cut back from? And that's kind of where I'm at, where like we feel so bad when we say no, or like all this opportunity that like potentially comes our way, and it's so hard to say no, and like and you end up like kind of spreading yourself thin. So I'm now at this point where I'm like, okay, maybe I am starting to be spread too thin, and it's actually starting to manifest itself in ways that I can see in what do I do and what do I cut back from, because I'm not a nobody anymore. I mean, one could say I was never a nobody, but people know me now.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
yeah.
I can really relate to that, especially with my own schedule lately. Um, there's a ton of things that I want to do. Projects and goals within the company, and game jams I want to participate in, and events I want to run for the community, and this show, and I love doing all of these things. But then I look at I'm very meticulous with my calendars, and I look at
Hmm.
my available remaining time for like playing a game that is like not part of some research or whatever, or seeing my family, or whatever. And it's like there's not a lot of opportunity left for that. I get like half an hour a day, to make a call or something like that, and it's not a lot, and it's not enough. So knowing that, and still having all of that desire, to that ambition to do all that things that you want to do, how do you manage having so little personal time left?
That's a really hard thing. I was thinking about this recently because one of my partners plays a lot of deck building games like Magic the Gathering, for
Yeah,
example.
great game.
And so when you're first beginning to play Magic the Gathering, you want to put every cool card into the deck.
Right.
And the deck is like a minimum of like 60 cards or whatever,
Hmm.
but you can do more than that. But it's very, very rarely recommended that you have more than 60 cards. And you're like, oh, but what about this? What about that? But like typically want it to be as efficient as possible, and things like that. And I was thinking like, okay, so if you know Magic the Gathering, you have to have lands to tap for mana, and you want to have a good land spread throughout the deck. And so you would need like, I don't know, like 23 lands, I think it is.
Hmm.
And so if I liken that to a day, it's like, okay, you need 8 hours of sleep. You
Yep.
can't take that out. You cannot have a deck with no lands because then it literally just won't function. Um, so I'm like, all right, so now I have to think about like what am I cutting away from? And I'm like, I think the most obvious thing I need to spend less time from is like Twitter.
Right.
It's the biggest, easiest thing. They're like, hey, do you like do you do less? And so to an extent, the networking, like I could maybe make a case to spend less time on, but it's also a time to be social for me, especially in this freaking pandemic.
These unprecedented times.
Yeah, it sucks, but being able to see people and meet people and the same people that you see all the week, like you see the same people every week sometimes, and it's just good to see them and you get to
Hmm.
know them, and now you're friends, and you look forward to seeing them every week.
Right.
So that's like a thing, and so it's like it's all this juggling and trying to figure out what can I do. And in the early days for me, I did game jams. It was always like, what do I do to get started? Game jams, because
Hmm.
you don't need to apply. You just join a team, and now you're writing music for video games, and now you're now a game composer. But I haven't really done too many game jams, and when I do participate, I am super uncrunchy. I'm just like I'm writing like one song or whatever. You need sound effects? Tell me. But I used to be a lot more hands-on with design, um, and some other stuff, and occasionally art. I'm not good at drawing, but nowadays it's just like, all right, here's what I can do. Just let me know what you need, and I'm
Hmm.
gonna do it, and everything else is kind of out of my hands. So, and that's like the rare time I do a game jam nowadays. So that's something that I've cut back on a lot too.
Right. Um, do you ever like lament not leaving enough personal time?
I mean, the biggest thing for me is I try and go to bed by a certain time, and I'm
Same.
very bad at that. Um,
So.
so I think personal time still manifests for me in some way. What I'm actually losing is sleep.
Right.
So, yes, in a sense, because I'm not making as much progress on like games I want to play or shows that I want to watch and anime. But I'm spending a lot of time with people that I care a lot about, and I have to figure out like, okay, I need to do a certain amount of work every week, and I need to sleep. Uh, so I think right now the biggest things that I'm cutting out are sleep.
Hmm.
And I still get all my work done, but sometimes it's just like a frustrating day and you're very unproductive.
Now, I'm quite curious, like, to segue this into music because I find that like a lot of my work involves like writing, dialogue, narrative stuff,
Hmm.
um, and it's the time between work where the good ideas manifest and the little puzzle pieces find their way into the picture. How much is that true for writing music, or is it something that you can do easily or well when you're not at the desk? Do you sit at a desk to
Um,
make music?
yeah, I mean, this is kind of like my office in a sense,
Right.
but some of my best ideas come when I'm in the shower. I'm going to the bathroom.
Hmm.
I remember one time I was washing the dishes and I had an idea for a song. I'm like, I gotta finish washing these dishes, and I ran upstairs and I wrote that idea out as quickly as possible. And I'm like, this is a banger. Other times I'm just at my desk and I'm like, what the heck am I doing? Like, I don't
Right.
know. And you just have to brute force your way through things because like a creative cannot like as a professional creative, you can't afford to just do things when inspiration strikes you. You have to sometimes just work through that struggle of like, let's see what this sounds like, and then it's sometimes bad, and then sometimes you scrap the entire thing. Very rarely for me, but I did it recently where I'm like, I wrote the literally worst thing I've ever written ever, and I'm just throwing it out. And I
Hmm.
almost never do that. Other times I have ideas that come in the shower and I just never get a chance to write them, and they're gone. But
Yeah.
like, I think it is okay to be okay with that. Sometimes I record them in my phone to transcribe later, and I never do. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe one day, like next time I have writer's block, I'll like go through my recordings and be like, hey, I could use this.
Right. 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 I mean, I think it's also, even if you never end up using those, folder ideas, it still keeps your mind active and like valuing those creations in a way that like sort of creates a feedback loop that, you know, associates some positivity with it, so it'll just keep doing that. And then when you have the appropriate time to follow up on an active inspiration, you know, it's still doing that. But I want to talk a bit about this powering through the block. You know, I've heard this said so many times, and it took me quite a while to like really understand what it meant. Working without inspiration as a creative, and how it's like a really learned skill to do that. Can you walk me through what it was like as a younger musician? When was it? When was that? Do you really remember the first times you had to power through creating music that, you know, when you didn't have any inspiration?
The first and easiest example to come to my mind is the very first contract I ever landed. I'm like, oh, I'm legit. I'm getting paid to write music for video games. And I had no idea what I was going to write. And I was like, oh, man, it sucks that, like,
Right.
the highest, like, the thing that matters the most is, like, I have no idea what I'm doing, and I'm getting paid, and I'm running absolute shit. Um, I think sometimes you just throw ideas at the wall, and you just fuck around and find out. That's kind of how the thing is, I was not taught to write music, not really at least, and so I'm very much an intuition-based person when it comes to composing. And so if I don't really have good ideas, I just kind of mess around with notes until I kind of get an idea for a melody. I'm like, all right, well, this goes somewhere, and that leads me to this point. Like, you know, in writing, if you're writing text, you obviously have plot threads that go somewhere, and those have to go somewhere else. With music, it's kind of like that, where like, all right, so this goes up, and therefore it also has to go down, or it has to go elsewhere. And so sometimes it's just like you carve the path as you go, and sometimes it's trash. But other
Right.
times things start to like you chip away at this marble and you're like, okay, whoa, something's actually here. And you chip away at it more until it starts to actually become something that you can really work with. Um so as unfortunate as it is of being like, I have an idea, I'm gonna write it down. The idea is written down, I have made the thing. Other times you just have to discover it through that process of looking around and finding out.
Right. How did you feel about that first contract piece when you were finished it?
Um, it's the very first song I ever wrote for video games. I think is an absolute banger. But that song is the very first song I wrote for a contract, and partially, so that game's not done. It's in like early access. But when I eventually do more work for that game, eventually, I might want to go back and fix that song. But I also don't know. Like part of it's like the biggest thing for me that's hard is like you gotta let go. If the second song I write is just like infinitely better than So Goes, I suppose that
Mm-hmm.
first song is just gonna be one of my earliest songs and one of my rougher ones, and that's okay
Right, right, right.
because I got paid for it.
Yeah, I mean that's a big deal. I mean, we often talk on the show. Things are very framed in terms of like building your game, building a game yourself, and then releasing it and these things. But getting work in games and getting paid for work in games, especially in a slightly less professional space like the indie scene, can be a little daunting and a little risky sometimes. You know, projects tend to, you know, so a lot of projects can run on hope and goodwill for a while. Um, do you have any advice for freelancers who are in that space, and to make sure that they, you know, things go well and they don't get burned, and, you know, everybody walks away happy?
There are so many things I could say. Um, the first thing is get a contract.
Okay.
Even if it's rev share, especially if it's rev share. No, always, just always get a contract. Even if the contract's crap, write one that is very simple and just be like, I am going to be credited as this. I'm going to be paid this, and I'm going to be paid at this point. There are various things that you want to include in a contract, and it doesn't need to be the biggest, fanciest thing ever. But I would recommend having a contract if money's involved. In general, I also think that it is. I don't think rev shares should always be avoided, but I try to avoid rev shares as much as possible because uh I have like overhead that I need to pay.
Hmm.
I need to like worry about my own expenses. And I like rev share if I'm also getting paid up front, but rev share only projects I feel like almost never ever finish. The ones that do, it's survivor's bias, right?
Right.
Um, so if people are like, oh, but what about this? Like, that's the exception. All of these other rev shares that I've seen, things that I've participated in my very early career, where do they go? Nowhere. So that's my advice also of like avoiding rev shares. I like if there's nothing else, I suppose go for it. But also to find paying work should take priority over like any rev share. And also, as I was mentioning before, it is really hard, especially no, even now. I was gonna say especially in my early days, but even now, letting go of things is hard because you'll always be able to find imperfections of things, and perfection does not exist.
Hmm.
And so my kind of rule of thumb is I give myself a week to write a song, and then I'm done. And sometimes I go back and touch things up a little bit when I like hear things, but for the most part, I need to let go. When when all the audio for Kind was done, there were still so many things that I wanted to do, but I had to tell myself, you gotta let go because Kind needs to go gold. And there's
Yeah.
all these things, and she launched on like 4 platforms simultaneously,
Hmm.
and then Stadia a month later. She was so busy. She couldn't deal with all the audio crap that I wanted to deal with, and I had to let go.
Hmm.
And it's hard. And they're always think, like sometimes I'm like, man, I'm not crazy about that one song, or like this could have been better. But like it will matter to you more than it'll matter to other people in a sense. And it is okay to have not everything be perfect, not everything be amazing. Even like if you're gonna have a soundtrack of like theoretically 20 minutes of music, not all of those songs are necessarily going to be the best thing ever.
Hmm. You got to have a couple lesser than tracks just to make the other ones sound better. I mean, it's just basic math at that point, right? um,
Mm.
I want to we'll dive deep into Kind in a second, but I did want I have an interesting curiosity on the perspective of the rev share for musicians and artists, because very often I see the argument from like what you said makes perfect sense, right? There's you're contributing your time and effort and energy to the project. On rev share, you have no idea if it's going to go anywhere, and you could end up with nothing. As an artist or a musician contributing to a project, that's just you've wasted months or worse, years. um and then on the developer side, I often hear the argument, well, hey, they're contributing such a finite thing, right? Whereas the dev team is going to have to continue with updates and maintenance and everything post launch, whereas the music and art is finished. It's a finished product. And the it's there's this weird dissense of value when it comes to this thing, and that's why I also agree cash for the contract is the right way to go. But I'm curious if you have any response to the finite nature of the work versus the potentially infinite nature of the other side.
There's 2 things I want to say. One, you know how much money I've made on RevShare only projects? $0. I have never made money on a project that was RevShare only because none of them finished. None of them finished. And I am lucky because I haven't put in that much time on any RevShare only projects. I think I've done fewer than like 3. And the ones
Right.
that I did do, barely that much time commitment. If you can't finish your game or you have to constantly upkeep that game, that's not my problem.
Mm-hmm.
If you add additional content, that content will need art and it will need music, and you can hire us again. But like, if you're working on like this faith based and like, oh, like when things will, like, oh, like you get your share when like things are like, fuck that. I'm a business. I have expenses. Like I have to pay myself, and I have to live. I hate the starving artist sort of message and an idea and all that. Like Fiverr's entire like marketing is based around like, oh, you're like getting 4 hours of sleep and you're doing a billion things. You're a hustler. You're doing the grind.
Right.
And they're like, no, fuck that. Do less for more. I don't want to grind myself to death. I love what I do. And when I have the time and the resources to do everything I want to do, I make some good fucking shit. And it's awesome. But I'm not going to waste my time on people that don't respect my time. If you don't respect my time, why should I bother? And so I think there are a lot of people who don't have large budgets, and they might not be able to afford me, and that's okay. We might not be able to work together, but if they're all right people, that's fine. But a lot of times, like the people that like barely pay anything are so obnoxiously, they're just very nitpicky and needy, and like I think the idea of like, if you think that art and music is somehow less valuable because there's a finite amount of work that can be done, like, and that feels elitist and pretentious. Like I don't look down on other disciplines like like I think potentially like QA a lot of times is like looked down upon
Right.
in game dev, and it's like, well,
God,
fuck that. You know how much work QA does? You know, like it's unfortunately one of those disciplines that people only call it out when things are buggy, but when things are not buggy, like, you know how much work they did to make that good?
Right.
QA does so much.
I agree. The elitism amongst the development community is a big problem in the industry. It has been for decades. And I've seen it manifest in a lot of nasty ways. That has contributed to the downfall of a lot of really cool projects.
I will never work with people that look down on me. Why would I do that to myself?
Yeah, no, it's the right stance to have. But I'm glad there's a good. I'm glad you have such a strong and good retort for this posit. But let's dive into a project that did do good and shipped and went gold. Kine. I had the opportunity to play a chunk of it this week. It is for those who have not seen it, it is a puzzle game, a 3D puzzle game that uses instrument-based characters that have unique movement patterns to get through. I don't want to call them mazes, but what kind of puzzle is it? What do you call it?
There's a term called Sokoban, and it's grid-based puzzles.
Right.
The best way I can describe it is that there's a grid-based floor, and you move 3D objects through that. And
Right.
some levels do involve amount of heights, and God, those are difficult. But
I did find the game overall pretty challenging.
It's hard.
I don't have the brain for it, I don't think. But
it's really hard.
Yeah, especially because you're dealing with characters that have different movement styles. So, for example, the accordion will extend when it's on its back. It'll extend the accordion, but then at the same time, these pieces on the side come out. So if you're in a narrow hallway, it's going to bounce and you're not going to be able to. And you can, if you want to extend to tall, you've got to make sure you're on your face, or no, you got to make sure you're on your back. It's tricky figuring out the right way to maneuver through these puzzles and to reach the end goal.
She's the hardest. She's the one that took me the longest to kind of be able to conceptualize. That, like, some people think the trombone's harder. Some people think the accordion's harder. I personally think the accordion's harder.
So the trombone is pretty hard too.
Yeah. I love puzzles, and so I did manage to beat. I think I eventually got 100%, and I got all the achievements. But like, that game's hard. I don't blame a single person that's like, yeah, I couldn't finish it. Like, fair.
Right. The music in the game obviously plays a pretty important part. It is a game about musical instruments cutting together to jam and play music together. Can you walk us through, like, I guess from the start of composition for that game? And because I noticed that the tracks are layered, and as I progress, things get stacked on top of each other.
Yes.
I don't hear a lot, but I recognize that. I don't know much about music. Sorry.
That's okay.
And And so tell us about the layering process and composing for layers, because that was really interesting.
So the one, like you said that you don't know much about music, but you noticed that, and that makes me really happy because I did my job and haha. Um, the biggest there were several things that happened. Um, I wanted to stack up layers so that as the puzzles got more complex, so did the music, and it would reflect that. And also, it's because the premise of the game is that all the characters are trying to find their way to stardom and make it big. And so the earlier stuff is them, like narratively speaking, one can say that the earlier puzzles are them struggling through that, and as they get closer to the end, they're closer to attaining the goal. And so then you start to fill out the entire song and its in its fullness in its entirety. Um, the running are like 8 layers for each song, and they're all on the same bass line. So the thing is also, people ask me about the names, and like, are they music based? And to my knowledge, everything is secretly a math pun because Gwen is an animator, and something about animation puns. I don't know. I'm not an animator. But one of the puns had something about how the bass was constant, and she wouldn't budge on that, which meant that if I wanted to have all the layers stack up vertically, it would all have to be over the same baseline. And so the first thing I wrote, I actually still like, but it wasn't the right vibe, and also the baseline wasn't flexible enough for me to do 8 layers on top like 6 times, 7 times. I don't know how many individual stacks I did. So that was really hard. The first I wrote the accordion song first, then the trombone song, and then the drum song, I think, in that order. And by the time I figured those songs out, I started to get like creatively burned out in this, not like burnout, but I was like creatively like grasping at straws, like what do I do next? And so the song with all three of them together is like supposed to be like kind of like the middle point of all of them, where it's more like the traditional jazz, where like accordion was like Hollywood orchestral jazz, and trombones funk, and drums are Latin, and so like, oh, the center of it all is like big band jazz. But I think honestly what I wrote for that was like it's honestly one of my it's not my favorite thing that I wrote for that game. So it was really difficult. There's all sorts of weird technical difficult things that were like, what do I do now, and how do I mix all this stuff, and what am I like I'm what do I do for ideas? But sometimes you can reuse ideas and just be like, oh, now that the trombone and accordion are together in these puzzles, and it's like there are a set of I don't know if you got there, you might not have, but there are a set of puzzles where they go on a date. And so then I started to pick, I took stems from the trombone and stems from the accordion, and I put them together. It's like, haha, now they're like, oh, if you recognize the stems and they're coming together, it's like, oh, they're harmonizing together.
Right.
But secretly, I just reused material.
It's good. I mean, that's one of those things that kind of like brings together, I guess, the emotional core of a game without people even realizing, is like the harmonies that can be found in music being composed like that. I'm curious, what is the difference between a more and less fluid bass line? This is something that kind of piqued my interest here. You said that you needed a more fluid bass line in order to be able to create multiple layers and also multiple stacks.
So the bass line that I wrote, the very first song I wrote for that game, doesn't exist in the game. It's like I have a file somewhere, but like it's not actually available publicly anywhere, unfortunately. And that song was kind of nice, but the thing about that bass line is that so in general, songs have chords, and those chords lead to other chords. The way that bass line worked is that the chord structure was kind of weird for a couple parts of that, which meant that the material I needed to write would have been very specific. Here's also a technical thing that I didn't mention yet. When you have layers that add on top of things, there has to be activity during the entire layer, during that entire stem. There has to be activity during the whole thing, because if there's a huge gap, no one's gonna notice when it gets added in. Because you can't be like, oh, like most people, like no. If it's just going to be added whenever, the entire thing about game audio is that it is deterministic on the player's actions, and so you can't you can like program things in a certain way if you want to, but that's a whole nother thing. And so the layer needs activity the entire time. So I needed every single layer to have activity essentially all the time,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
which got hectic. One thing
Right.
I learned is I had like piano that was simple, it was just chords, and then I swapped out that piano with a different piano that was more melodic. But because the original bassline required a very strange and specific chord structure, stacking um like 24 different melodic lines on top of that were all unique to each other was gonna like I was like I need to start fresh.
Right.
And I tried a different one and it was ass. And then I tried another one. And that one worked out. So yeah, it takes some trial and error sometimes.
I was going to ask if you like start with the completed track and then strip things away, but I realized in order to get to the completed track, you need to start at the base and work your way up to begin with.
Yeah.
Um, so this was this your first time having such extensive layering in composition?
Yeah, it's funny because the kind of was the third game I ever started working on, but the first one to ship.
Mm.
The two that the first one I ever worked on was there were a bunch of characters and I wrote themes for all of them, and all of them are different genres. But kind of was the first one to like have layers, and I've never done it. I never did it before, but now it's like my kind of specialty because while I have friends that are like, oh, this is an orchestral composer, and this is like a funk composer, and like a chiptune composer, like I don't have a strong affinity towards genre or texture even, but I love layers, and I loved what Grant Kirkhope did um, for Banjo-Kazooie and Donkey Kong 64, and Yukio Kaio for Luftrausers. And so like that shit's cool, and I wanted to do that. And now I
Mm-hmm.
kind of try and figure out how to do that in any opportunity I can. Like sometimes I don't, like only cans I don't have any special layers, but that's the kind of thing that I think is the most video gamey aspect of video
Mm-hmm.
game music because you have that opportunity to make things more reactive to gameplay. Why not do it? And that's the way that I know how to do it. There's an infinite number of ways that you can make music reactive to gameplay. This is my way.
Right. I was about to say it is the most gamey, gamified, most video game type of music to make because it is stripped down to its different components and can be kind of reorganized in a way that making a track straight out for a character or whatever is not going to be the same. I get that. What are, in your opinion, then, some of the best ways designers can leverage this style of composition? What are like, yeah, if I'm designing a game and I've got your brilliantly stacked layers of composition, what are the elements of gameplay that best syncopate with layer additions and changes?
So I don't know if there's a succinct answer to that question. When I first talked to Gwen, I told her that idea, and she thought that seemed kind of cool. And we talked more, and eventually she hired me, and I was like, "Here's my demonstration for that." And she's like, "All right, this is cool." And obviously sometimes like, "All right, this is my concept isn't quite working out. Let me tinker around with it more." With um, so with Whisker Squadron, I will really quickly say I'm never gonna do like over the same baseline 8 layers up for a bajillion things. That's like that was so much. With Whisker Squadron, I only have two things. I have like the flight song, and at the end of the level is a boss, and then I have a boss version of that song. And so that's only an A/B switch, opposed to adding 8 layers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for a game by this mobile game studio called Zelda Games. The gameplay was like you would circumnavigate a planet by just flying around it, and it was like a flat circle, and you would fly around this planet while asteroids came out, and you tap the screen to dodge the asteroids. And so I had certain things where like when you started the game, all the layers would be active. When you died, only like the percussion and bass would be active. And like when like you were zoomed out from the planet before you actually started the level, you would have like maybe just melody or whatever. Essentially, I broke that into like 4 areas where it's like melody, harmony, bass, percussion. Um, and I stack things into that way. So like developers can account for this and then find someone, aka me, and they can find someone to write music in that specific way if they have that idea. But at the same time, if a video game could theoretically make a case to have music written like that for many, many places. It's just a matter of how does the composer maybe want to tackle that, and how do they want to add layers to it? I never ask my developers to be like, hey, can you make your game differently so that I can make my music for it? I make my music tailor-made for that game, and I like layers, and so I figure out a way to put layers in and have it be dynamic to the game.
Outside of Kind, then, what are some of your favorite examples of this style being used in other games?
The biggest ones are Banjo-Kazooie,
I haven't played. How does that? So what? How does it work in Banjo?
Oh, let me tell you about Banjo-Kazooie. The way Banjo-Kazooie is that there is an overworld, more or less, called Gruntilda's Lair, and that's where you spend most of your time walking around outside of the individual playable levels. So, in Gruntilda's Lair, it has a really catchy theme, and as you approach every one of the major playable levels, you have a version of Gruntilda's Lair that it switches to that exemplifies that world. And so, Treasure Trove Cove is a pirate-based level. It's a big tropical island, and as you approach Treasure Trove Cove's level, the music of Gruntilda's Lair keeps playing Gruntilda's Lair, but it now switches to like accordion, and you hear ocean waves and other things like that. If you go to the desert level, it will switch to like, I don't know, I can't remember what instruments, but it switches the instruments that you kind of generically associate with like the Middle East, I guess. And then the haunted house one has like a theremin, and it's all spooky, and you hear like organ and like thunder cracking. There's also other cool things, like when you go underwater, no matter where in the game, when you go underwater, it switches the music to a texture that makes it sound underwater, which is marimba.
Right. Interesting. So okay, so I can see how, from a development perspective, I could as the transition is needing to be made, I load up that alternate version of the song, cue it to the same time stamp of the existing song, and then sort of like fade them into each other. Is that how you do this? Or
yes.
Is there...
I, to be honest, I don't know all the technical possibilities of implementing this. Implementation is its own art to be. There's all sorts of things, and so one might be able to load them up at certain loading points and then sync it up. Sometimes, I think for Kind, what happened is as we load it into a level, all of the stems played silently at the same time, and then when you got to the next one, you would raise the volume of that one up. If it's just the AB version, like I had with the flight with Whisker Squadron, it might be that they both play at the same time and then they crossfade the volumes.
Right.
They that's not actually implemented yet, so we haven't messed around with that yet. But there's a tricky thing with also Kind. Am I allowed to say that? I don't know.
It's fine. We don't need to go into spoil. But I mean, I can see like if all 8 layers are playing this simultaneously. We thankfully live in a time when we all have gigabytes of memory available to us, and having 8 tracks playing simultaneously, even though silent, is not going to destroy your system. So it's a fine thing to have. You don't need to really stress too hard about the efficiencies on, I don't think. Yeah. Are there other applications, apart from transitioning the song, for world states that you've noticed or you've been interested in, or that inspired you when going into this method of layered track development?
My other big influence that I go to besides Banjo-Kazooie / DK64 is Luftrausers, which is made by Vlambeer, and the composer is Yukio Kaio. He also did Minute and Fall Guys. the way Luftrausers is that you pilot a sort of airplane,
Hmm.
and there are three aspects to the airplane. There's the gun, the body, and the propeller. And those each have different versions. And so you can have a body that's like very light but very fast. And you can have a body that's like very slow but also tanky. And there are all sorts of different ones. I can't remember them all. Like one gun is like it just shoots a normal bullet, one is a shotgun spread that's not very far, one's like a big slow cannon. But every single one of those has their own um variant. One of them is one of the variants is melody. One of the variants I think is bass, and one of the variants is drums. And depending on which ship that you build, you get a different version of that song, and they're all named actually. But what's also cool is as I kind of messed around with the music, because if you buy the album on Bandcamp, you can actually download all the stems and fuck around. So there's one section in the song where it's always the same, and that's kind of like the big theme of the game, I would say, and it's really iconic, and I think that soundtrack is so cool. But it's I'm not trying to downplay anything, but like when I looked at it this way, I'm like, oh, it's actually kind of simpler and more executable than I initially thought it would be. Like I could try this. I don't have a case where like I'm working on a game that happens to have these parameters where like, oh, these different parts, but if there was something like that, I might try and take a crack at that because I love that soundtrack.
Right.
And I've made a modular soundtrack by accident with Kine.
Right.
So I suppose I could try it like Luftrausers, but in a more intentionally.
Right. I'm familiar with the game. I have played a bunch of it, and I know what you mean about how the tracks come together. It's interesting to think then that the complexity of the individual tracks is less important than the synchronicity between the designer developers and the musicians in this case, right? Because without good pairing of like, because the other brilliant thing about Luftrausers is the music matches the body of the ship. For example, the way it sounds is reflective of the ship's design, and so it's the difference between and I'm curious if this is a challenge. Sometimes being a gun for hire is integrating well enough into a project to allow for that synchronicity, and like how did you come to do it so well with Kine, when it would have been just as easy to here's music, here's 15 levels of music, and see you later.
So to give credit where credit is due, Patrick Balthrop is a sound designer. I know that he knew Gwen through BioShock Infinite. I think he worked on BioShock with her. I remember seeing his name in the credits for Tacoma. I'm like, I know that guy. But he actually was hired to do. She did like a first audio engine pass, and then he like made it better. So he kind of, I think he probably programmed it. I don't know, but he basically made the audio engine make sense and good. And I did a little bit of implementation, but a lot of time, like it's just funny that like whenever I work with an indie dev and I have a pretty complicated, like a relatively complicated with a lot of moving parts, system of music, and then I'm like, do you want middleware? And they all say no.
Right.
And therefore I've never messed around with middleware, but I don't fight him because also like I understand there's all sorts of reasons why people don't want to have middleware. There's all sorts of reasons why middleware might be good. But essentially I just talk to the developers and they either program it and if it doesn't work then I might try and figure out another way to make it work myself. But the answer is I don't know, and it's kind of based off of what game you're making and how consistent the programming is. I'm not a programmer.
Right.
I don't know. But there is middleware, and I can learn middleware and make things work consistently.
for those of us who have no idea what middleware is.
Oh, donk. So there are, I think middleware is a general term in terms of like other stuff that you can, for audio, there's audio middleware implementation called Fmod and Wise. And these are things that you put into the engine where I believe it's like if you have the hooks that are programmed, so it's like every time you jump, you have a hook for sound effects. You put in Fmod there, I think. I'm not. I'm going to be honest, and I never lie about what I do and what I don't know. I don't know how to use these programs because I've never had to learn them yet,
Right.
and every time I am like, I'm going to take the time to learn it, shit comes up in my life and I'm busy. So one of these days I'll get a better idea. But essentially, when I describe audio, there's three aspects to it. There's music, there's sound design, and there's implementation. And that all might be one person, but that also might be three different people. So in my case, I do music, I do sound design, but the implementation is usually done by the programmer. And so middleware is this external engine that you can put into your engine, Unity probably, because Unreal's actually kind of decent. And it gives the audio person more control, and it gives them that ability to make things do the things they want it to do, which can free up your programmer. If that sounds worth it to you, maybe it's a worthy investment. But for all of the clients that I've worked with, none of them wanted it. And therefore, I just gave them the assets. And then I told them what I was hoping for. And that's kind of how it is so far. So, yeah, a lot of my audio friends are like, you got to know this and you got to know that. And you don't have to know everything. I definitely don't know everything. I'm the first person to admit when I don't know something. And I've never learned implementation. But one day I will, because I think it's good to know. And I could, if I'm able to know consistently how to do the thing, make the game play the audio in the way that I want it to, that will help, I suppose.
I'm curious then to know what is the path to learning good implementation, and where do you start?
If you're an audio person and you're trying to learn how to do implementation for audio, Wise, it's spelled WWISE, so it's just the word Wise with an extra W in front. They have an entire certification process where you have this very in-depth, and a very in-depth tutorial of how to use it, and people say it's fantastic, and then you can take a certification test that you pay money for to be officially Wise certified. They're like, I am an expert in Wise. Fmod is more familiar in terms of its UI to audio people, in the sense that it looks like a digital audio workstation. A DAW for short is what more or less every audio professional does their work in. And so Fmod looks like a DAW. Under the hood, apparently it's similar to Wise. I can't say. And so it's theoretically easier to pick up, but I know that Wise is pretty exemplary in its tutorial and the resources for that, whereas Fmod is like there are resources out there. I don't have any that I off the top of my head would be like, here's where you go to learn Fmod.
Right.
But do I think it's? I just saw the question. Or was that to?
That was me
Tiago?
asking the chat.
What's up, Tiago?
Yeah, I'm curious if you finish the Wise 101 cert, is it worth it? Because I've gone through some certs myself, and I've not been particularly impressed with certs. But again, it's a different. It depends on the person, right? Right. I'm rather obstinate when it comes to accepting that I've learned something from someone else.
You can also take all of the tutorials and not take the certification test that costs money.
Right.
And you will still have known it all. But also there's a legitimacy in having a certification that's like, I officially know this. And if you want that, go for it.
For me, I want to work with people in Japan and see it being valued there. I've talked to a lot of people in the games industry there, and they all seem to have it. While I'm not able to say it's worth it anecdotally, I feel like it could be a plus, right? I agree. I feel like that's the same with a lot of certifications. Recently we were doing some applications, and it's like, do you have any certifications? I'm like, well, we do. We never talk about them, but here they are. I get it. Yeah, it's a plus. Not. It's not going to be the thing that proves you actually know something, but it could suggest it. That's cool. I guess what are you looking forward to coming up in your projects and your work and other people's projects that you're interested in?
So, in terms of my own work, I'm currently working on Whisker Squadron, which you said, I think you told me that you didn't know a ton of it.
I've seen that. Here, I'll drop the Steam link here.
So, it's made by the developers who made Race the Sun,
Mm-hmm.
which has been sitting in my library since 2013, actually. And I'm like, wow, that's a video game I own. That's cool. So I met them, but I'm floundering a little bit. I met them over Twitter, but the point is that it's like roguelike Star Fox. So if you like Star Fox and you like roguelikes, wishlist Whisker Squadron. It's going to be good. And I'm having an absolute blast writing just bops. I'm just writing some sick bops. And it's space, and there's cats, and the cats talk, and I have recordings of real life cats, and I make them sound like they're from like Animal Crossing or something, or I mess around with like the cat recordings to make them sound like something between like Animal Crossing and like the original Star Fox and other things like that. So yeah, our voice actors are cats. That's great. The other thing I'm working on right now is also She Dreams Elsewhere, which is a surreal JRPG game. It is. To be perfectly honest, don't think I could explain the story super duper well, but to my knowledge, it is a game where you're like in a coma and you're trying to get out. And I think if you like surreal JRPG games like Earthbound, Undertale, or like Omori and there's like a whole subgenre of like RPG Maker games. If those sound interesting to you, then She Dreams Elsewhere might be interesting to you. I'm not doing the music for that game, but I am doing the sound design. The composer for that game is Mimi Page, and so far, from what I've heard, that game sounds pretty good.
Yeah,
I mean, music-wise.
It is pretty. It does have a really good soundtrack so far, and the game is coming together quite well. If you guys are interested in seeing more on that, here, let me grab you the link real quick. Here's our industry chats with Davian Gooden, who is the lead designer of the game.
I love Davion. He's so great. Oh.
Yeah, it's a very cool project, and for all you RPG Maker devs out there, it is a testament to more of amazing things you can do with the engine. Yeah, so Whisker Squadron and She Dreams Elsewhere coming up. Anything else you are looking forward to?
In terms of games that, so the tricky thing is because I am slow and busy, I very rarely play games on launch.
Right.
I play games years after they come out.
The best time.
So one thing that I'm actually like really looking forward to coming out on launch is Guilty Gear Strive, because I love fighting games and I'm bad at Guilty Gear, but I want to get good, and it's gonna have rollback netplay, which is exciting. I know a lot of people are losing it over near Replicant.
Mm-hmm.
Hilariously, before Near Replicant came out, like a month before it launched, I should say, I picked up Near Gestalt on the PS3. And I'm going to make my way through that at some point, and I will be like parallelly experiencing everything, but at a worse gameplay experience. And then I'll get Automata and play that. And then maybe I'll get Replicant and I don't know. But in terms of upcoming things, I'm very personally excited for Guilty Gear Strive. And what's new that people are coming out? I guess I can plug my friends. Shout outs to Team Toad House. My friend Alana is running the Palestinian bundle, the Palestinian Relief Bundle, and it is also, it is exemplifying. What is the word I'm thinking? There is a Palestinian game dev who made a game based off of an experience in Gaza from several years ago. And so if the way the bundle is you buy that game and you also get like 800 other games. So that's great. And so Alana's the one that's running it. She's Taiba Y on Twitter. And her studio is called Toad House Games, and they're making a visual novel called Call Me Sarah, which is a game about making friends as an adult. You move to a new town. It's not a romance-based game, but it's just about having healthy boundaries as an adult. It's also very mental health conscious and has a very diverse cast. And while that game is being developed, they also have like these smaller vignettes that feature other characters in that game, like sometime before the main game comes out. And one of them is out now called Good Looking Home Cooking, and it's about Ramadan, and it's about a Korean girl and a Pakistani girl and their dreams to make a halal food truck park for Ramadan, and just like the hustle and grind of like trying to make a restaurant is hard.
Yeah.
So that game is like legitimately super great. Um, I like I'm a cultural consultant, but like for the most part, I'm hyping up this game because one, Alana is wonderful, and Team Toadaz and everyone that works there is wonderful. But also, I think this game is super good, and it needed to exist, and like the game's like $10, so like it's actually going to be in the Palestinian Relief Bundle, I believe. So, but
Awesome.
that's something that I plug.
Awesome. If people want to find more of you, your music, all the good stuff, keep an update on your projects, where should they point their eyeballs?
I am at Chel Wong Audio, basically everywhere. Twitter and Instagram. I hate Instagram, but I'm at Chel Wong Audio there. In my Twitter bio, there's also a link tree. It's Linktree Chel Wong Audio, and it has all of my links, such as my website, chelwongaudio.com, and chelwong.bandcamp.com. As well as my Spotify URL and my and YouTube URL, which are not human speakable because it's just a bunch of letters and numbers.
Good
Yep.
stuff.
So Linktree, linktree.ee/Chelwong Audio is here's everything.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you super much for coming on and teaching us about layered audio. It is now my brain is starting to churn in interesting ways for some projects I've got. Is there anything you want to leave the people with before we send them away for the evening?
I would appreciate it if you wishlisted Whisker Squadron and She Dreams Elsewhere. Wishlists always help. And I guess if you wish to support me personally, buy my music on Bandcamp or listen to it on Spotify. And later, actually, in what's the date? And on June 11th, we are launching our 3rd annual charity album for able gamers, and I'll be posting all over social media for that too. So I'm very excited to launch that album because we've been working on that for quite a bit.
Right on. Well, thank you very much for coming on. Thank you, chat, for sticking with us and as talking in the chat. And we'll catch you later. I'm probably gonna send y'all to Frankie Pixel for tonight, and then I'll see you tomorrow. We're gonna do some more work. Bye for now.
Thank you so much for having me.